Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Brazil Imperial, which is a 1 to 4 player Euro 4X board game designed by Zé Mendes and published by Maldito Games. This one takes around 100 minutes to play on average. Before I get into my review of Brazil Imperial, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, Kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer here in the UK, and if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so the main map for Brazil Imperial is going to look like this, where you have this modular board, and this could be completely changed depending on the player count and on how much you want conflict to be a part of the game. So I've set up for a 2-player game here, where one person's capital is going to be here, the other one's going to be here. There's also going to be these kind of question mark unexplored areas, which have been randomly allocated at the or during the setup of the game. And the idea is you want to be trying to explore the map and find out what's on the reverse side of these and so on. You're going to have these painting cards, which can be acquired by the players throughout the game to give you permanent upgrades and abilities. You're going to have all the resources. You've got, I think it's 4 different types of resources. You've got these red wood, you've got this one here, you've got this this coffee, I believe. You have this knowledge, which is like a wild resource that trumps everything. And you have the gold, which trumps all the basic resources. You also have a little board here, which stores the battle cards and the gold cards. So the battle cards are going to be used in combat, and the gold cards give you little boons as you collect them and play them throughout the game. There's also going to be 2 cities on display at all times, which can be built by the players. And each player is also going to have their own personal player board, which shows all the different actions you can take. Each player is also going to get given one of these unique player characters, which you can use the abilities of throughout the game, which will give you, again, unique things that you can do and nobody else can. And you can see here, all these different pieces have been set up on their pre-allocated spaces, because the idea is you want to be trying to gain resources and place these out onto the board. So not only so you can unlock their ability, but also you can start unlocking victory points by doing so, because that's going to be a big way that you gather points throughout the game. Now, the game is going to be divided into 3 different eras. You've got era 1, 2, and 3. And each of those eras is going to be almost dictated by the tempo in which people play these cards or achieve these cards. So you can see here, this player has these 3 objective cards. In the first era, they want to have 1 military unit on the map, they want to own 1 trading post, and they want to own 1 farm. And once they've declared that they've achieved that, then you'll move on to era 2. So although the game will end on the round when somebody completes their Era 3 objectives, that doesn't necessarily mean they'll be the winner, because the winner is going to be the person with the most victory points. And this is all the criteria that you're going to need to get points, such as deploying your units, manufactured goods, which we'll talk about later, painting cards, revealed missions and Era 3 cards, gold cards, exploration tiles, because some of these might have victory points on the reverse side, palaces on the board, cities and buildings. So how do you actually play the game? So on your turn, you are going to take one of these 7 actions. So you have the deploy, painting, build, renovate, manufacture, harbour, and trade actions. And when you take one of these actions, you're going to put your little era marker on it like so, to show that's the action you've taken. And in your following turn, you will not be able to take the same action again. So you'll have to move, and you cannot keep spamming, the same action. So the first one, deploy, is where you're going to draw a combat card from the deck here. And these will do things to kind of swing battle in your combat throughout the game. So this one will give you 1 combat strength if you come into conflict with another player. And you also get to deploy a military unit if you can spend the resources for doing so. So you can see here that you have the different military units here. Like on this board, you have the archers, the monarchs, the dragoons, and the cannon. And they get more expensive as it goes on. So you can see here, these 2 archers are pretty cheap, where you only have to spend 2 basic resources. And when you do that, if you can afford it, you are going to remove it from that spot there, and you're going to place it on either your capital, which is your starting space, or any future cities that you build. And again, you're going to unlock those victory points at the end of the game. Now, these military units also have unique abilities on them, such as the Monarch, which will let you establish new cities. You've got the Dragoon there, which is like a cavalry unit, which can actually drag other units with it when it comes to moving. And you have the Cannon, which is a ranged attack. So you can actually attack from 1 hex to another. The painting action simply allows you to spend resources or even acquire a card for free out of these painting decks here. So there are 3 different painting decks, and once you get these cards, they will sit in your kind of reserve, or you can use them whenever you want, or they'll just give you a passive ability. So you can see here that these basic ones here let me increase the yield of my cane fields. So this one produces 1 more sugar cane, or this one makes my farms produce more coffee beans, or you get the more expensive ones here, which are quite pricey, which will let you put a palace on the map, which I'll talk about the relevance of later, or this factory one here, which lets you get endgame points in different ways, or even ones here where you can just spend a resource to get a knowledge token, which again are very powerful, or this one here that says any of your units can build a city and not just your monarch. The build action, of course, will let you build new buildings, and that is going to be based on the age that you're in. So in age 1 or era 1, you can only ever build these 4 buildings. So a sawmill, a trading post, a cane field, and a farm. So this is going to be the cost. This is going to cost a coffee bean or one of these green resources. And once you do that, you are going to take that resource type. Let's say I built a farm here by spending one of these and one of these. I can place that building on any of the adjacent spots to where I have an existing building. However, you have to bear in mind that there is only certain terrain types that they can be built on. So you can see here that the sawmill and trading post can only be built on a wood spot like this, but this cane field and farm can be built on kind of any spot that looks like this. So let's say I spent those resources, I end up putting the building here like this. Now this symbol here is going to show the resources that automatically appear on that spot. So I'll take those 2 coffee beans and put it on there like so, meaning that they are mine to spend. And as the eras progress, you can see I can start to build gold foundries or plantations, or even these cities, and the resources are going to be, a bit more pricey to spend. And eventually in era 3, you can even build these churches and academies, which can start producing these knowledge tokens. The renovate action allows you to replenish your buildings of the resources that have been spent. So let's say throughout the game I ended up spending these 2 coffee beans. Then I took that renovate action. I can actually restock them like so, ready to be used again. Or I can actually choose to flip it over and then replenish with the other resource. So this one would now be a cane field. And then I can place those 2 cane on it like so. So you have that bit of flexibility there, so you're not quite locked in to what you've only just built. The manufacture action relates to this part of the board here, where you can spend these resources, providing you have them, and upgrade one of your existing actions. So let's just say I ended up spending, let's say I spent these 2 canes here in order to get this upgrade. I'll take that white cube, not only unlocking victory points at the end of the game, but I'll also get to allocate this cube to one of these upgrade spots. So I can put this on this square here, on the renovate spot, or I could have done it on the harbour spot, but let's just say I use the renovate. Now, whenever you take these actions or slide them down to these spots, it means that in the future, when you take one of those actions, you are going to get a better version of it. So for example, from now on, if I ended up putting this little pentagon here, I would get to deploy 2 military units and draw 2 combat cards. Or in the painting, I can get a discount on the resources that I'll need to spend to acquire it. In the buildings, I can kind of spend any resources, not just the ones on the actual tile itself, so it gives you a lot more flexibility. The renovate action means that you no longer have to spend a resource to replenish one of your tiles, which is something you'd normally have to do. The manufacture one means that you can start manufacturing these goods at a 1 resource discount. The harbour one means you can draw a gold card. And the final 2 actions are pretty simple, where the harbour, you can simply take one of the basic resources, and the trade one lets you trade resources for better resources, essentially. So that one there, you can see I can take any of the basic resources and upgrade it to a gold, or I can even do something like this, where I can trade 2 combat cards in for a gold card and a gold coin. Whenever you take a basic action, you can always follow it up with a free movement point, so you can move one of your military units around the map 1 hex at a time. And additionally, on top of that, depending on the action you've taken, you can actually move a further spot. So you can see here, if I took the deploy action, not only would I get my free movement, I can also bring someone back to my capital or one of my cities. This one lets me get a free movement onto this wooded area, so I can actually go 2 spots like that. This one lets me move onto one of my buildings. This one lets you move on to a coastal region or into the water. And this one here lets you move onto a gold space. Now, if you have your marker on one of these spots, you can see here that your military power is altered. So this means that if, say, someone attacks you and you are the defensive player and your marker is here, you actually get +2 to your combat skill, or if you attack somebody, then you can get +1. Now, as soon as you've completed one of your era objective cards, like this one here, where you can see I need to have 1 military unit on the board, I need to have 1 farm and 1 trading post, and me as the orange player has achieved that, then on my turn I can declare that I've achieved it, and then we'll progress into Era 2. Now, when that happens, a number of things will trigger. So the first of which is that you will take your little action marker here, you'll flip it over like so, and then you will place it beneath one of the different actions, and you can choose which one that is. And all that means is that when you take that action in the future, not only will you get the normal action, potentially the upgrade if you've invested in it, you'll also get this bonus action here, and this Era 1/1 is going to let you peek at one of these hidden tiles so that you know what to travel towards. And after that, you are going to get to place one of your palaces onto the board, and these are going to do different things and give you different kind of end game scoring criteria. So this one here means that not only are you going to get one of these resources, you're going to get a free cube upgrade by moving that manufactured good to one of those allocated spots. You've got the ones here which says that I get a gold card and all of my gold mines are going to be worth a point at the end of the game. This one here that says I get one of these sugar cane and all of my plantations are going to be worth 2 points at the end of the game. This one here that says that I believe all of my manufactured goods are worth an additional point. And you have this one here that means you get an extra point for all your military units. Now, not only do you get those points, they also need to be built on a certain type of terrain or a certain piece. So you can see here, like to start with, this one needs to be built on top of an Era 1 building. So what that would mean is that I'd have to put that on here like so, which not only would upgrade, give me that benefit, but it also means that when I come to renovate that tile, I would not be able to flip it over anymore. So let's take a look at some of these discovery tiles. And of course, these would normally be face down and only be flipped over once you venture onto them. But they do a ton of different things. So you've got these expedition tiles like this, which are essentially an NPC, I suppose, where you're trying to fight against the game and use your military units to engage in combat. And when you do that, you're going to need to have a certain amount of combat strength to conquer that tile and use your free movement to fight it. Now, your combat strength is equal to the amount of points that the unlocked military units cost. So you can see here that my archers are worth 2 strength, my monarchs also worth 2 strength. And also when it comes to combat, you could spend up to 3 of these combat cards to boost your combat strength. And when you take one of these expedition tiles and fight them, you're not only going to get those victory points at the end of the game, you'll also get the little boon here, which says, I can take 2 wild resources. You got the ones like this one, which means when you build on top of it, you'll get 2 victory points. You have these unknown species, which means that the more you collect, the more points you'll get. And you've even got ones like this one, which means that when you go onto that tile, you can draw a new objective card, which gives you an opportunity to put a new palace down. Now, when it comes to fighting other players, and you venture onto other people's buildings like so if I moved onto this piece, I would automatically engage in combat with this blue player. And as normal, you'd compare your military strength with the combat cards that you choose to play, and you can play up to 3 of those cards. And if the offending player wins the combat, then they are simply going to park their unit on it, meaning that hex now belongs to the conquering player as long as they are stood on it. But as soon as they start venturing off again, then it's going to go back to the basic player or the starting player. So it's kind of a temporary thing when it comes to conquering other people's tiles, and they don't convert to yours permanently. So let's take a look at a couple more of these painting cards here. So you've got this immigrants one here that says when you manufacture, you can actually place any of the tokens on any of the arch upgrade spaces. So you're not restricted by the particular shapes there. You can end up placing this hex on this square should you wish to do that. You've got this one here that permanently gives you +1 combat strength. The blue cards here that says you can pay -1 resources or -1 gold when building a building once per turn. So it gives you a lot more, better value there. This Nabucco card here says that academies produce an extra science and are worth a victory point. And these 2 here that says in combat you permanently get +2 when defending or +1 when attacking. Or this one here that says you can build on any terrain type and your existing buildings. I've also flipped a few combat cards here just to show you some examples. So this one here simply gives you +2 combat strength. You've got the one here that says You can pay resources to boost your combat strength. Each time you spend a resource, it increases by 1. This one here that says if you have units on an adjacent space, you get +2 to your combat strength. This one here kind of nerfs your opponent's strength if they're using their ranged attacks. And this one here actually lets you spend a gold to basically cancel the combat. So if there's a fight you really don't want to partake in, then you can spend gold to evade that. And I've also flipped a few gold cards here, which can be used as extra actions on your turn, or they can actually be spent as gold themselves by cashing the card in, which I thought was a nice touch. So this one here says you can deploy your monarch, just paying its costs. This one here lets you build a church, paying its costs. So again, you're getting a boost and can speed up your turns. And this one here lets you move one of your units from the map to your supply to gain 1 gold and 1 science. So you can take one of your military units off the map. And you've got the industry card here that lets you exchange gold for, or lets you exchange basic resources into 3 gold. And finally, this spy one here, which lets you actually look at the hand of somebody else. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Brazil Imperial. Now this of course is a resource management game. You want to be building buildings in order to get better buildings down, and to get your military units down, and to get your manufactured goods down, all with the aim of getting points. But despite the variety of resources here, the key resource in the game to me is time, because this truly is an efficiency puzzle. It's all about the order in which you resolve these items, and you want to be wasting as little time as possible. And this is definitely one of those games where you can find yourself making mistakes that you just think, oh damn, I should have done this first and then done that and then done that. And that for me is quite fascinating. It adds a lot of strategy and a lot of depth to the game. And especially when that is mixed with the tempo and the pressure that you are trying to keep up with the other players in terms of getting their objective cards complete. Because if you're playing inefficiently, inevitably you are going to fall behind. So you ought to be making sure that you are not wasting any turns at all and keeping up in terms of not being caught off guard, because you don't want the game to end when you are not in a strong position. One of the things I really like about this game is just the buffet of great options you have at any time. I want to get my buildings down as quickly as I can to start manufacturing goods. And because, if it's a busier map, then the actual land itself, the real estate is scarce. So you want to get in there before the other players do and get your buildings built. Additionally, you want to be racing to get these painting cards, because these can be fantastic and they are very limited. So you've got to be in there quicker. You want to get your manufactured goods down as quickly as possible, because the earlier you get them down, the more efficient you're going to be for the rest of the game by getting these follow-up actions and better versions of the basic actions. You even want to be kind of getting to these cities quicker than the other players, because if you find yourself building towards a certain city to build and then somebody snaps it up before you do, all of a sudden the resources on that building has been taken and you have to start again from scratch and re-strategize. Now, one thing I've generally found with games like this is that they tend to drag on a bit too long, and I always find that the pacing is a little bit off. But one thing that I really appreciate about Brazil is the fact that it seems like every single speed bump or obstacle, which normally, again, draws me away from these kind of games, has been removed. For example, the flexibility you have on the resources is great, because even though you spend a lot of time to build a certain building, if you use those resources and you renovate it, you can flip it to the other side. So although I suppose thematically that might be a bit disconnected, it does make the game tick along at a much better pace. Additionally, the upgrades are good straight away. All of a sudden, if you want to get the upgrade for the buildings and you can spend any resources to build those buildings, that just, again, makes the game flow so much smoother. The same goes with the gold cards. They give you lots of rule-breaking things that just make the game tick along faster. And the same applies to the painting cards as well, where you can start using goods as wild resources and things. So again, every single obstacle which normally draws these kind of games to a halt has been removed, and it flows quite wonderfully. I do really appreciate that tension of the Era 3, because the game can end at any time. You don't know what other players are going for. I suppose you could take an educated guess if you have a look at their game state, but it does mean that you think, I've got my objective done here, but I still do not think I'm in the strongest position. Therefore, I'm not going to trigger the end game yet. I've got a good infrastructure here. I can maybe get some more military units down. I can get some more upgrades and maybe even get another palace down or something. So yeah, I love that pressure of when is the time to end the game. So one of the things that made me a little bit apprehensive about Brazil was the combat, because generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of conflict and, really confrontational games, especially when it has this Euro flair. However, I thought that the degree in which the combat was pulled off in Brazil is very impressive, because it is not make or break, and that if you don't want to partake in a very, conflict-driven style game, you can still partake in the military part of the game. So you're not just cutting off, a big portion of the game just to suit your gameplay, because it's still massively advantageous to get your military units down because they are worth a ton of points. But also, you can actually fight the expedition cards here, so you can actually use your military units to your advantage and not actually step on the toes of the other players. That's a really good touch for a player like me. I also thought that the way you engage in combat with the other players was quite cool, because you do not actually steal the buildings from them. It's just that you're temporarily seizing that building and can exploit its resources and even use it towards one of your objective cards. But once you're done with it, you can start, moving off again, and then it'll revert back to the original player. I also thought it was a really good idea that if your military unit gets eliminated from the board and it goes back to you, it does not actually go back to the spot. It goes back to your kind of supply, meaning that when you redeploy it, you do not have to spend its cost, and you can simply put it back onto the board free of charge. And again, that might sound like, an easy fix. But what it does mean is that you are wasting the time to get it back onto the board. And as I said, time is your hottest commodity in this game. It's also a nice touch that you can really build the kind of maps that you want. There are a bunch of suggested maps in the rulebook, and again, depending on your play style, if you want a really tight game, you can put all your capital cities close to each other, so therefore you're going to be competing over the buildings and the land space. Or you can take a bit more of a divided map like this one here, where the chances of you encountering each other, at least earlier in the game, are pretty slim. So again, I like that kind of tailorability to the kind of players you're playing with. Additionally, the player turns and the uptime in this game is really good, because each turn does not take long to resolve, and you do have just enough time to think about your next move by the time the other players take their turns. Now, despite the game being generally easy to explain, I thought that the movement part of the game was a little bit clunky, and when it comes to, again, explaining it for the first time. Explaining that after your main turn, you get a free movement, and then after that movement, you can potentially get a bonus movement, but with quite a restrictive outcome on here. That for me, again, it felt a little bit weird. It felt a little bit disjointed. But I can understand why they did it, because this isn't the kind of game you want to be able to fly around the map, because you want that tension of racing to these exploration tiles. But again, for the first game, or the first few turns, it's just a little bit unintuitive. Now, despite combat not being a huge part of this game, I do think the way it's actually resolved is, not terribly exciting. By playing these combat cards, you're not going to be able to predict what people have in their hands, and therefore it might feel a little bit swingy. But despite that, again, because the the actual consequence of combat isn't huge, that is something I'm willing to forgive. And I really appreciated the power level of the individual characters, because these are all really useful, but they're not game breaking. Like, for example, this Dom Pedro card here says that, for the first painting of each type I collect, I get a bonus resource. So that's useful for me, but it's not powerful enough that everybody else needs to know about it, and they don't need to be paranoid about what I'm capable of. I think the production for this game is absolutely fantastic. I love the kind of stripped back look here. The modular board looks great when it's set up. I love the way that the military units look, just simple wooden pieces, but they're carved really well, and they look great when they're on the table. And the player board itself is really intuitive, and it comes together wonderfully. All the art and stuff I think is nice. It's not fantastic, but it looks good. And all the symbology as well is spot on. So I've got no issues at all with the production. And in fact, I'm very, very happy with the way this game is put together. Okay, so let's get into some final thoughts for Brazil Imperial. And I have to say, I am very impressed with this game, which I'm delighted about, because I've been wanting a game like this for a long time, because I don't have a 4X style game in my collection. There have been games that have tried and failed before, normally because they're too long, they're too drawn out, and they try to fit too much into the game. This one has just that perfect level of complexity without being overwrought. It's an intuitive system, which definitely is going to be reminiscent of games like Scythe. When you're taking an action, you can upgrade the action spaces. And I think if you like Scythe, you're pretty much going to guaranteed to like this one. For me personally, I do like Scythe. I'm not, really hot on it, but I think this game is an improvement on something like that because there's just a little bit more going on, and I like the way everything is resolved. I really like the player powers you can acquire. All of them seem good. There's this massive scramble to get to them, so therefore the pressure is on. But at the same time, if you're going for this, you're going to be neglecting something else. So you're constantly spinning all the plates in this game, and again, it always boils down to how efficient am I using my player board here? Which order am I going to be taking these actions in to, for as little wastage as possible? Yeah, this game just ticks a lot of boxes for me. I was very impressed with everything it delivered, and it's what I wanted. I wasn't sure that there was a game that could be pulled off like this, and for me, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Now, I'm not entirely sold on the way the combat is resolved, but the way it plays a part in the game is just right for me. That idea of just seizing buildings temporarily rather than taking them for good. It doesn't feel so destructive, and it just sits right for me. So yeah, very happy with this one. I think it's going to be a hit. I'm going to get this one out to the table semi-regularly, I think, especially if I go to the games group or something where the players are more inclined to this style of game. And yeah, I'm very happy with it. So that is Brazil Imperial, definitely going to sit on my rankings. And yeah, I'll put the rankings below. And this is a hit, an absolute hit. And I'm very, very happy to say that.